What if I told you that the $50,000 a year position you either can't afford to hire or are already paying for and can't fully justify, the office manager, operations coordinator, back office admin, that most of what that person does all day can now be handled by software that costs $50 a month? Not hypothetically, not in some future version of the industry, but right now in real restoration and field service businesses running real jobs with real crews. I want to be careful here because I know how that sounds. It sounds like a pitch. It sounds like an overstatement. So today I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, task by task, hour by hour, dollar by dollar, what a real AI back office looks like in a 15 to 25 person restoration operation, what it replaces, what it doesn't, what the actual financial impact looks like after 12 months, and why the contractors who figure this out in the next 18 months are going to have operational cost structure that their competitors simply won't be able to match, at least not without making the same shift. If you've ever ended a week wondering where your time went or looked at your overhead and felt like you were paying for capacity you weren't fully getting, this episode is for you. So let's get into it. Welcome back to AI on the Job. I'm Tyler Janelle, Chief Operating Officer at JobDocs and Vice President of Revenue at Mr. Restore. And today we're getting into something that I think about constantly from both of those vantage points: the back office of a field service business and what it actually costs to run one. Let me start with a question. At your operation right now, how many hours per week are spent on tasks that are not directly billable? Not in the field doing the work, not in sales building the next job, but in the administrative coordination layer that makes the operation function. Scheduling, status updates to customers, task list creation when a new job comes in, manual time logging, report generation, following up on change orders that were completed but not documented, chasing crew leads for job updates, processing insurance correspondence, generating progress reports for adjusters. If you're running a 15 to 25 person restoration operation, the answer is probably somewhere between 25 and 45 hours per week across your team. Similar for HVAC and other field services. Some of that is spent as your time as owner and operator. Some of it is your office manager, coordinator. Some of it is your project managers who spend a meaningful portion of every day routing information rather than managing projects. And some of it is your crew leads who spend time answering questions that the system should be handling on its own or have already answered for them. Now put a dollar value on that. Owner time at $150 an hour, office coordinator time at $25 to $35 an hour, project manager time at $45 to $65 an hour, crew leads at $30 to $45 an hour, 35 hours a week of combined administrative coordination time across those roles, conservative estimate, at a blended rate of $55 an hour, that's nearly $2,000 a week. Over $100,000 a year in compensation, going to work that is not building anything, not billable to any client, and in a well-designed system, mostly shouldn't require a human to do it at all. That number is what I mean when I talk about the back office cost of running a field service business. Not the obvious overhead, the rent, the insurance, the equipment, but the invisible overhead, the human time spent routing, coordinating, updating, and chasing information through a system that wasn't built to make that information move automatically. Today, I'm going to walk through what an AI back office actually looks like in a field service operation, what it does automatically, what it changes for the people in those roles, and what the financial picture looks like after a year. And I'll be direct about what it doesn't do because the title of this episode is deliberately provocative, and I want to be precise about what I mean by it. So let's go. Real quick, if you're getting value from this show, the best thing you can do is follow us wherever you're listening. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and it'd be helpful if you'd leave a review on Apple. It only takes 30 seconds and it helps other contractors find the show. If you know someone running a restoration, HVAC, plumbing, or field service business who needs to hear this, feel free to share it with them. That's how we grow, and that's how more contractors get the information they need to stop leaving money on the table. New episodes every Wednesday. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Okay, so before we talk about the solution, I want to spend real time on the problem because I think most contractors underestimate what the administrative layer is actually costing them. Not in a vague, it takes up time way, but in a specific, dollar quantified opportunity cost way. Because the real cost of administrative overhead isn't just the salaries. It's what those salaries could be producing if they were directed at different work. Let me describe a typical day for an office manager or operations coordinator at a mid-size restoration company. And I want to be specific because I've seen this firsthand both from the Mr. Restore side and through the contractor conversations that shaped what JobDocs was built to do. The day starts with a stack of texts and emails from the night before. A crew lead asking what phase comes next on job 14, information that should have been in the system automatically and triggered when the previous phase was marked complete. A customer asking for a status update on their job, information that should have gone out automatically 2 days ago when the last milestone was hit. An insurance adjuster asking for a progress report, something that takes 20 minutes to compile because it has to be pulled from 3 different places and then formatted manually. A subcontractor confirming he'll be on site Thursday, information that needs to be logged, communicated to the crew lead, and confirmed against the schedule, all manually. By 9 a.m., an hour and a half of the day is gone, and nothing has been created. No job has moved forward, no revenue has been generated, no client relationship has been deepened. The morning has been spent routing information that a well-designed system should have routed automatically the night before. This is not a failure of the office manager. This is a structural failure of systems that weren't built to make information move without human intervention. And it's not just the office manager's time. Every person in the organization who interacts with that information, bottleneck, pays a tax. The project manager who is to call the office to find out whether a subcontractor confirmed instead of just checking the system, the crew lead who texts the PM for the next phase instead of getting a notification when the system updates, the owner who can't get a clear picture of what's happening across all active jobs without making 4 phone calls and then waiting for the answers to come back. There's a particular version of this problem that I want to name directly because I see it most clearly from the revenue side of my work at Mr. Restore. Administrative burden doesn't just cost you money in the hours spent, it costs you money in the revenue you don't capture because the people who should be managing client relationships and identifying new opportunities are too busy routing information. A project manager who spends 4 hours a day doing administrative coordination, status calls, manual updates, chasing documentation, is a project manager who has 4 fewer hours to identify scope opportunities, build client relationship, and set up the next job referral. That's not a small cost. That's a structural revenue cap that's invisible on a spreadsheet, but very real in the growth trajectory of a business. One more dimension of this cost that I want to put on the table before we move to the solution: the cost of errors that happen in manual coordination. When information is moving through text messages and phone calls and manual data entry, things get missed. A change order gets documented verbally but never entered into a system. A scheduling conflict gets communicated in a text thread that the relevant person doesn't see until it's too late. A job status update gets entered with the wrong job number. Every one of those errors costs something, whether it's a billing gap, a crew showing up to the wrong site, or a customer who doesn't get an update and calls in frustrated. Manual coordination is not just slow. It's error prone in ways that have real financial and relationship consequences. Let me now be very specific about what an AI back office actually does in a field service operation. I'm going to go through this task category by category because I think the general claim AI automates your back office is easy to say and nearly impossible to evaluate without understanding the specific mechanisms. What actually gets automated? What does that look like in practice? What does the human role become when the routine coordination is handled by the system? Right now, when a new job comes in, let's say it's a water loss call, a mold assessment, a fire damage referral, one of those. Somebody has to create the job record, build out the task list for that job type, assign tasks to the appropriate roles, set the initial timeline, and make sure the relevant people know what they're responsible for. Depending on your systems and your volume, that process takes 20 to 45 minutes per new job. For a company running 90 jobs a year, that's 30 to 67 hours a year just in job setup. Not job execution, but job setup. With an AI back office, job creation triggers an automatic workflow. A new water damage job comes in, the system generates the task list for a water damage job automatically, based on the job type you select. Drying equipment setup, daily moisture readings, adjuster notification, drying log completion, scope documentation, reconstruction handoff, all of it in the correct sequence, assigned to the correct roles, with the correct dependencies between tasks so that task 6 can't be started until task 4 is complete. The project manager doesn't build the task list. They review it, adjust anything that's specific to this job, and they start working. The setup that used to take 40 minutes now takes 5. When a task is marked complete, the next task in the sequence gets triggered automatically. The crew lead gets a notification that phase 2 is ready to begin. The materials for phase 2 get flagged for ordering. The customer gets an update that the job has moved to the next stage. None of that requires a human to remember to do it. The workflow runs itself, and the humans in the system redirect their attention from managing the workflow to managing the work. Customer communication in a restoration operation has a specific challenge that other industries don't face, at least not to the same degree. Your clients are almost always in a stressful situation. They've had water damage in their home. They've had a fire. They're displaced. They're uncertain, and they're waiting to hear that progress is being made. The contractor who communicates proactively and consistently, who makes the client feel informed and cared for throughout the project, gets referrals, gets reviews, and gets called first when the next loss happens. The contractor who communicates reactively, who waits for the client to call and ask for updates, leaves the client feeling anxious and underserved, regardless of the quality of the actual work. Problem is that consistent proactive communication requires consistent proactive human effort. And that effort competes directly with everything else your office coordinator and project managers are trying to do. When things get busy, customer updates are the first thing that get deprioritized. Not because anyone decided to deprioritize them, but because there are only so many hours and the urgent things crowd out the important ones. An AI back office changes this completely. Customer updates get triggered automatically based on job milestone completion. Job created, client gets an intake confirmation with the project manager's contact information and an expected timeline. Drying equipment set, client gets a message explaining the drying process and what to expect over the next few days. Drying logs hit the completion threshold. Client gets a notification that the drying phase is complete and reconstruction planning has begun. Job marked complete, client gets a closing message with a request for review and the information they need for their insurance claim. None of those messages require your office coordinator to write them, time them, or remember to send them. They go out automatically in your company's voice at exactly the right point in the project timeline. And here's what that does for your business beyond just saving time. It makes you the company that always communicates. In a market where most contractors communicate reactively, consistent, proactive communication is a competitive differentiator. Your clients feel informed, they feel cared for, they refer you, and you achieved all of that without adding a single hour to your coordinator's week. We covered the change order problem in depth last episode, the 16,000 to 20,000 annual leak that comes from scope work happening without corresponding billing. But I want to address it here from the back office workflow perspective, because this is where the AI back office earns perhaps its biggest single return. In a traditional back office setup, change order tracking relies on a human being staying on top of every active job, knowing what scope changes have been discussed or initiated, following up with crew leads and project managers to confirm that field changes got documented, and then making sure that those documents are tied to an updated invoice before billing closes. On a portfolio of 15 to 20 active jobs, that's a monitoring task that could easily consume 10 to 15 hours per week if done thoroughly. Nobody does it thoroughly, though, because nobody has 10 to 15 hours a week to dedicate to it. So it gets done partially and the gaps become a leak. The AI back office watches every active job for signals that indicate a change order may have occurred without corresponding documentation. Labor hours logged above the phase estimate, field notes referencing areas or materials outside the original scope, timeline extending beyond the estimated completion without a scope update. When those signals appear, the system generates a flag, not an accusation, not an automatic billing entry, but a prompt for human review. Someone looks at the flag, confirms whether a change order is warranted, and initiates the documentation while the job is still open and the client is still engaged with the project. And then, at the billing stage, the system acts as a gate. Before an invoice can be finalized, the system checks that all open change order requests have a resolved status, approved and invoiced. Great. Proceed. Pending approval? Flag it. Do not finalize the invoice until this is resolved. Declined? Document the decision and proceed. That billing gate, which takes the system a fraction of a second to run, does the work that would otherwise take a human being a detailed review of every active job, every single billing cycle. The leak closes not because the humans got more disciplined, but because the system won't let the invoice go out until the check is done. Okay, so scheduling a field service operation is a logic problem that gets harder as crew count increases. At 2 crews, you can hold the schedule in your head. At 4 crews, it requires active management. At 6 or more crews, well, it's a full time coordination challenge. Who's available? Who has the certification for this job type? What equipment is it? Which location? And what's the drive time from the current job to the next one? And how does a job running long cascade to everything that that particular crew is supposed to do for the rest of the day or the rest of the week? Manual scheduling at this scale has a specific failure mode that I see constantly. The schedule gets built on Monday morning with good information, and it degrades throughout the week as reality diverges from the plan. A job runs long on Tuesday. The crew that was supposed to move to job 22 on Wednesday is now behind. But the cascade update, adjusting everything that that crew was responsible for and scheduled for downstream, requires someone to actively monitor the slippage and manually reroute. In a busy week, that often doesn't happen fast enough, and the crew shows up somewhere they're not fully expected, or a job gets delayed that didn't need to be. AI scheduling watches the relationship between actual job progress and the schedule in real time. When job 19 flags as running behind the estimated timeline, the system automatically surfaces the downstream impact. Job 22 is scheduled to start Thursday with this crew. Do you want to adjust the timeline or reallocate? The project manager sees the conflict before it happens rather than after. The decision gets made proactively. The client for job 22 gets updated before they're sitting at home waiting for a crew that isn't coming. That's not just operational efficiency, that's client experience, which is revenue. The last category I want to cover is reporting, and I want to reframe how most contractors think about it. In a traditional back office setup, reporting is a periodic activity. You run a report at month end to see how the month went. You generate a status report when an insurance adjuster asks for one. You build a weekly summary for the ownership team when you have time to do it. Reports are things you produce when you need them, which means they're always describing something that already happened. By the time you're reading the report that shows job 14 ran 15% over budget, the job is closed and the loss is permanent. An AI back office turns reporting into continuous monitoring. Instead of generating reports when you ask for them, the system maintains a real time view of every active job, color coded by health status, flagged when something needs attention, updated continuously as costs are logged and milestones are hit. You don't run a report to find out how job 14 is doing. You open the dashboard and it tells you green means on track, yellow means watch this one, and red means something needs your attention today. The information is always current. The intervention happens while it still matters. For insurance correspondence specifically, the reports and documentation that adjusters request throughout a claim, an AI backed system can generate structured progress reports automatically from the job data that's already in the system. Drying logs, moisture readings, phase completion dates, equipment placement records, all of it organized into a professional report format without someone spending 45 minutes compiling and formatting it manually. In a restoration operation that works with insurance carriers regularly, the time savings on documentation alone can be 2 to 4 hours per job. Across a full year of volume, that's a meaningful number. I want to address something directly because I know it's the question that's sitting in the back of a lot of minds right now. Well, what happens to the people? If AI is doing the task management and the customer updates and the change order monitoring and the scheduling coordination, well, what does the office manager do? What does the operations coordinator do? I want to be clear and honest about this because I think the framing of replacing a position, while it makes for a striking episode title, doesn't fully capture what actually happens. Here is what I've observed consistently across the contractor operations I've worked with closely. When an AI back office takes over the routine coordination tasks, the humans in those roles don't disappear. Their jobs change fundamentally in a way that most of them describe as an improvement, not a loss. The office manager who is spending 3 hours a day processing status requests or building task lists, sending update emails, and chasing job information, that same person in a well configured AI system is now doing something different. They're handling the exceptions. The customer who's genuinely upset and needs a real conversation, not an automated message. The subcontractor relationship that has a complication the system can't resolve. The insurance adjuster who has a specific question that requires judgment and context. The job that has circumstances unusual enough that the standard workflow needs to be modified. These are the things that require a real human being with real judgment and real relationship skills. The AI handles the volume, The human handles the nuance. I've heard this described multiple times now in different operations with different words that land on the same core experience. The job became more interesting, more human, more strategic. The person who was spending most of their day being a relay, taking information from one part of the organization, passing it to another, is now doing actual relationship management, actual problem solving, actual work that requires them to think and decide rather than just route and log. In most cases, they're better at that work and they're more engaged when they're doing it. That said, I want to be honest about the full picture because I think intellectual honesty is more valuable than a clean narrative. In some operations, the shift to AI back office automation does reduce the number of back office positions needed. If a 3-person administrative team was primarily doing routine coordination and AI takes on most of that coordination, you may find that the work that remains, the exceptions, the relationships, the judgment calls can be handled by 1 or 2 people rather than 3. Whether that means eliminating positions, shifting those positions to other functions in the business, or allowing natural attrition to right size the team depends entirely on the specific operation, the people involved, and how leadership handles the transition. What I can tell you with confidence is this: the operations I've seen make this transition thoughtfully, where leadership is clear about why the change is happening and what the human roles become, have not had significant culture or moral problems. The ones that handled it poorly were the ones that implemented the technology without communicating the intent clearly, leaving people to wonder whether they were being replaced rather than repositioned. The technology is not the hard part. The communication is. There's one more human dimension I want to name, and it's the one I actually think matters most: the owner, the operator, the person running the business. In every operation I've worked with where an AI back office was implemented, the most significant change in reported experience was at the top. The owner, who was working 60 or 65 hours a week and still feeling behind, working 50 hours and feeling like they're ahead. Not because the work got easier, but because the information layer changed. The morning starts with a dashboard check instead of a phone tree. The decisions get made with complete information instead of a best guess. The problems get surfaced before they become emergencies. That shift from reactive to proactive, from always behind to actually in control, is not a small quality of life improvement. It changes the entire experience of running the business. Let me put some real numbers on what this shift looks like financially over 12 months for a representative operation. I'm going to build this from the patterns I've seen, not from a single company. These are composite numbers that reflect what's typical when the implementation goes well and the team actually uses the system. Okay, so the operation: 20 employees, 2.5 to 3 million in annual revenue, primarily residential water damage and mold, maybe doing some commercial, running before the AI implementation on a combination of email, text, a basic CRM that's mostly used as a job list, and a lot of personal coordination by the owner and office manager. It's a competent team, good market reputation, owner working approximately 60 hours a week and still frequently feeling behind on visibility into what's happening across active jobs. Revenue impact: 60 to 80,000 annually. This comes from 2 sources. First, the underbilling leak that we covered last episode. When the AI system is watching change orders, flagging billing gaps, and running pre-invoice reconciliation, the money that was previously leaking through undocumented scope changes and untracked materials gets captured instead. Based on the patterns from episode 2, that's typically 40 to 65,000 per year for an operation at this volume. Work that was already being done and paid for, now getting billed correctly. Second, volume capacity. When the back office coordination burden drops significantly, the project managers who were previously spending 30 to 40% of their time on administrative tasks have more capacity for active project management, which means they can effectively manage more jobs simultaneously without quality degrading. Operations that make this shift typically see a 15 to 20% increase in job capacity without adding headcount. At 2.5 million in revenue, 15% more capacity, conservatively converted to 70% of that in additional revenue, because you won't perfectly fill all the new capacity, is roughly 265,000 in additional revenue potential. In practice, contractors rarely capture that full number in year 1 because sales doesn't scale perfectly in parallel, but even at 30% capture, that's 80,000 in additional revenue from the same team. Cost reduction: 30 to 50,000 annually. The direct cost reduction comes from the back office time that gets freed up. If the AI system is handling 15 to 20 hours per week of work, coordinating what was previously done by a combination of the office manager, the project managers, and the owner, well, at that blended rate of $55 per hour, that's $825 to $1,100 a week, or $42,000 to $57,000 a year. Not every operation translate that fully into cost savings. Some of it goes back into the business as owner time recaptured. Some of it allows PM capacity to grow without adding a position. But in operations that right size their back office staffing over time, the direct cost reduction is real and meaningful. Margin improvement, 4 to 8 points. Gross margin improvement is the most important number because it compounds. Closing the underbilling leak directly improves job level margin. Better change order capture improves margin on the jobs where scope expansions were previously going unbilled. Operational efficiency improvements reduce the overhead costs per job as the same administrative infrastructure supports a higher job volume. Taken together, operations that implement this well consistently report gross margin improvements in the 4 to 8 point range over 12 months. On 2.5 million in revenue, 5 margin points is $125,000 in additional profit from the same revenue. Owner hours, 10 to 15 per week recaptured. This one doesn't show up on a P&L, but it matters enormously. The owner who was working 60 plus hours a week because they were the information hub for a system that didn't move information automatically, well, that person typically reports working 45 to 50 hours within 90 days of a well implemented AI back office. Not because the business got smaller, because the morning phone tree is gone. The reactive status management is gone. The manual report compilation is gone. What's left is the work that requires the owner: decisions, relationships, strategy, and growth. That's 10 to 15 hours per week redirected from maintenance to momentum. Over a year, that's a different business trajectory. The platform cost for all of this. JobDocs starts at $50 per user per month. For a 20-person operation where 10 users are active on the platform, that's $500 per month or $6,000 per year, plus the $1,000 white glove onboarding fee. Total first year investment, $7,000. It gets a conservative revenue and cost impact of $90,000 to $140,000. That's a return of 12 to 20 times the investment. I'm the COO there, so take that with the appropriate grain of salt. Those numbers are operational patterns, not from a marketing calculator. Let me close with the real practical piece, because the numbers are compelling, but they're meaningless without a path to getting there. Here's what I've seen work and what I've seen fail in the operations that have made this transition. What works? Starting with one workflow and getting it right. The operations that make this shift successfully almost always start narrow and expand, rather than trying to automate everything all at once. Pick your highest volume job type, water damage residential for most restoration companies, and configure the full workflow to that job type first. Task templates, customer communication, triggers, change order monitoring, billing readiness check. Run 10 jobs through that workflow before you touch anything else. See what the system catches. Understand what it doesn't catch. Adjust the configuration based on what you learn. Then expand to the next job type. That approach, narrow first, expand from results, produces a system that actually fits your operation rather than a generic system that nobody fully uses. What works? Communicating with your team before you launch. The single biggest implementation failure I've seen, not with JobDocs specifically, but with any operational software, is launching without telling the team why it's happening and what their role becomes. If your office coordinator finds out that the system is now sending the customer updates she used to send and nobody told her what her job is now, she's going to feel threatened. She's going to resist the system, consciously or not. She's going to find ways to work around it rather than with it. The technology is not the barrier. The human adoption is. Have the conversation before you launch. Be specific. Here's what the system is going to do. Here's what I need you to do that the system can't. Here's why this makes your job better, not smaller. What fails? Expecting the system to fix a data problem. I said this in episode 1, and I'll say it again here because it's the most common failure mode. An AI back office requires structured data to work with. If your jobs aren't being logged consistently, if your crew isn't updating task status in the system, if your change orders are being tracked in text messages, the AI has nothing to monitor. The workflow automation can't trigger if the trigger events aren't being recorded. You have to build the discipline of data entry before you build the intelligence layer on top of it. In practice, this means the first 4 to 6 weeks of any implementation are primarily about getting the team into the habit of logging into the system and keeping job records current. It's not glamorous, but it's the foundation everything else depends on. What fails? Choosing a generic platform. I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. A generic project management tool with AI features is not an AI back office for restoration or field service companies. It doesn't know what a drying log is. It doesn't understand the relationship between moisture readings and phase completion. And it doesn't have a built in change order workflows that understand how restoration billing works with insurance carriers. Sure, generic tools will automate some things and miss the restoration specific things that actually drive the biggest returns. If you're going to make this investment, make it into a tool that was built for this industry by people who understand this industry. The difference in real world performance is not subtle. Okay, so let me bring this home. $50,000 a year in back office compensation is not an unreasonable number for a 15 to 25 person restoration operation or other field service operation for that matter. What I'm describing today is not eliminating that function. It's redirecting the human capacity in that function from routine coordination to the work that actually requires human judgment, human relationships, and human creativity. The routine coordination gets handled by software that costs $50 a month per user. The humans do the work that only humans can do. The financial case for making this shift, $90,000 to $140,000 in combined revenue impact and cost reduction in year one against a $7,000 investment, is as strong as any I've seen in contractor technology. But the case that I think actually matters most is the operational case. The ability to run a growing business without your personal capacity being the bottleneck. The ability to take on more jobs without adding administrative overhead proportionally. The ability to go home on a Friday at a reasonable hour and actually know what's happening in your business rather than hoping for the best until Monday morning. Next episode, AI job costing specifically. What it is, what the 5 data inputs are, and a full walkthrough of what a real AI job costing dashboard looks like and how to read it. If you've ever looked at a job cost report and felt like you were reading the story of a battle that was already over, well, next week is the episode that changes how you think about it. Share this with a contractor who needs to hear it. I'm Tyler Janelle. This is AI on the Job, and I'll see you next Wednesday.